Hello and welcome to offshore powerboat racing. This week I'm at the beautiful setting of Poole Harbour on the Dorset coast. Coming up, action from the second round of the 1992 European Class 1 Offshore Powerboat Championships and the 11th round of the Class 3 National Championships, with boats that vary from 16 feet and 90 horsepower to 50 feet and almost 3,000 horsepower. It's a cocktail that always mystifies the large number of spectators that make the annual pilgrimage to Poole for this event. But for most, all eyes and dreams eventually focus on the sheer magnificence of the Class 1 fleet. Although compared with a few £1,000s for the small race boat, one of these giants would set you back a cool £500,000, bristling with all the latest technology, including satellite navigation and F-16 fighter cockpits. Richard Carr is Britain's top Class 1 throttleman.
It'll be rough out by the Needles, between Needles and Old Harry, but the inshore leg I think will be very flat and quite fast. It'll be a good mixed race. I think it'll be Poole Pico I think will do quite well because obviously it's a very fast boat and do well on the inshore, but obviously in the rough I think we'll be kicking some ass.
Yeah, can you explain how the conditions suit your particular boat?
Well, yeah, we've propped the boat today really for middle conditions. I mean, basically I would like the race to be a little rougher than flat calm, otherwise Poole Pico will just walk it. But I think that, no, I think we'll do well today. I have a good feeling.
Obviously, in the European competition, you did quite well in Norway, obviously leading the race, and then obviously engine problems again. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, Norway, we went down the river, which was quite exciting. It's very, very narrow, and we were all running down there, down the fjord, and we got out into the rough seas and we took the lead. And we'd taken quite a big lead over everyone, including the monohulls, and then the chain box went, the arms and drive broke, which we think we've now solved that problem because it's the second time it's happened to us this season. But I mean, the reason that's happened is just simply due to the amount of power now the boat's producing. And, you know, it's a chain reaction. The more power you get out of the engine, the more problems you get all the way down the drive chain. So, you know, you've got to eliminate those problems, and I think we've now done that.
Well, obviously this season, I mean, you proved this race boat and the team is a winning team, yeah?
Yeah, we're doing quite well. I think, considering the amount of small, niggly problems we've had at the beginning of the season, I mean, we're still lying fourth in the World Championship. The World Championship's still wide open. I mean, we've only got to get one more win, and let's say Steve Curtis takes a breakdown in one race, and, you know, we're then back in real contention again.
But Carr's rough weather boat is no match for Antonio Giuffredi's flat water boat. Poole Pico, the trimaran, has been clocked at almost 140 miles per hour, but does not handle well in the rough. Norway's Andreas Ugland, on the other hand, thrives in the rough. He won the first heat at Arendal in Norway in mountainous seas. The 47-foot Butzi-designed boat is the only monohull in the race, and with 3 Sea-Tech turbocharged diesels producing almost 2,300 horsepower, Ugland and co-driver Jan Hilsted will be a match for anyone in this fleet. Also on view, the new 2-litre World Championship winning boat of Tony Genvy and Eric Braithwaite, attempting to add national honours to their world crown. But for Carr and the rest of the fleet, it is soon time to prepare for the start. No stone is unturned in the final checks. In a 4-heat championship, it's essential to get early points. And no one knows better than Marco Capoferri in B&B Italia. His 300 points for a second in the first round are invaluable. Conditions were still deteriorating, and the start time was brought forward in an attempt to avoid the worst of the impending winds. Even so, as the 11 competing boats mustered on the start line, each knew it was going to be a bumpy ride, even on the shortened rough weather course. This would take them first to the Christchurch ledges, then turning at the Needles and back towards the Old Harry rocks, before returning to Poole. 4 laps and a total distance of over 80 miles. On the stroke of 10:30, the start boat raised the green flag and they were away. The calm waters of the bay a far cry from the unprotected waters at the Needles and beyond that they were soon to face. First to break was Marco Capoferri in B&B Italia. Hungry for success in major competitions, Capoferri had finished second in Norway and looked set to do well here. But Richard Carr in Techni Lamborghini and Italian Damiano Speltu and San Benedetto, both without points, soon surged past. Behind them in third place, Andreas Ugland's bewinged monohull Fiat Uno was no match for the faster Cats, but he knew that in the biggest seas ahead he would carve a path. Meanwhile, Capoferri, realising it was getting rougher, settled in behind him. In front, the head-to-head between Carr and Spelter was beginning to develop into a duel, neither prepared to give an inch in the quest for honours. Carr's aggressive throttling has already paid dividends. The 1991 national champion also won here last year, finished second in the Cows Classic and fifth in the World Championship at Trieste. And all that against the might of the Italian Armada. He had indeed served notice of his arrival. And but for a series of niggling mechanical problems this year, he would surely be leading the world. His spectacular victory in the European Grand Prix in Jesolo sent the Italians scurrying for excuses and put him in fourth position above most of their prize teams with all to play for. But now he faced what was perhaps his severest test. As he and Spelter rounded the Needles Mark, they were hit by the westerly swells head-on, where expertise counts for a great deal, but where a little luck is also necessary. It was here that Carr's boat excelled. The 39-foot Cougar's Sea Swallow allows the boat to conquer both rough and smooth conditions, with its controversial deep tunnel. But even so, things were far from easy, and Carr fought to control with Spelter looming up in his mirrors. Spelter, meanwhile, was putting the extra weight of his diesel engines to good use. Filling his bow tank, and with trim tabs down, he was pounding his way through, refusing to let Carr's much quicker boat out of his sights. His dilemma was obvious. For over a lap, he had thrown everything at Carr, but still hadn't got past. He now had to regroup his plans and try again with Maurizio Rossi, his co-driver, to hatch up a new strategy. Andreas Ugland, on the other hand, was clearly enjoying himself. These are precisely the conditions for which the monohull was designed. And fresh from his second place overall in the Venice Monte Carlo Marathon, he and co-driver Jan Hilstad were making the most of it. In fourth place behind them, Marco Capoferri was still running a controlled race, content to let the others battle it out up front. He was in full control of the American skater Cat, using the advantage of the Mercruiser's Z-drives to keep the nose down and keep the boat running level. But as they head for home at the end of lap 1, Techni Lamborghini led. Rising to the occasion from each wave, Carr was in triumphant mood and looked set to record his second successive Needles victory. Behind him, though, danger suddenly lurked. Ugland was the fastest man on the course and was only 4 seconds down on San Benedetto. But Spelter responded, cut loose to the mark, and just held on. Capoferri, meanwhile, was still grasping the opportunity of shelter in the wake of the boats ahead. And as more and more dropped out, it looked to be a very good idea indeed. He looked to be on a winner. In fact, by the end of lap 1, there were only 5 of the 11 starters remaining. Fletcher, Allenby and Davey had all fallen by the wayside, and it was Carr who led the charge into the second lap. Behind him, Ugland's progress was temporarily halted by the calmness of the bay, but he was still third, with Spelter ahead in second, his whispering diesel turbos in stark contrast to the rasping roar of Carr's four-valve Lamborghinis. But as they made their way back to the Needles on the second lap, it was Carr who was still in charge. This was home waters, and he was determined to show the Italians the way home. And with almost half the race gone, he was a long way towards proving that point. Welcome back to Poole, where on lap 2, Damiano Spelter had reduced Carr's lead and was threatening the Englishman's dominance. But Carr's throttles were still down and he resisted the challenge. He was clearly not in the mood for silver medals and was still going for gold. Spelter, realising there was no way past, pulled wide and held back, planning his next attack. It came at the Needles Mark the second time around. Spelter, spotting Carr had taken the mark wide and at full throttle, eased further back and cut inside, and it was here that he had his first stroke of luck. Carr was hit by 2 enormous waves, cutting his speed dramatically, and suddenly Spelter was level. The response from Carr was immediate. Realising he had lost position, he accelerated. was a gamble, but one he had to take, as he surged ahead of the Italian once again. But Spelter also had mastered the conditions and came back at Carr. This was Class 1 powerboat racing at its very best, both boats dancing across the waves, both being driven beyond their limits. But Spelter, who came so close to a European honours last year, was driving well, and it was here that he had his second piece of luck. Carr had just regained the initiative when out of the blue the Cougar Cat took one trip too many and Carr ploughed into an enormous wave. The impact stopped the boat in its tracks, ripping off the canopy lid and swamping the engines. It was cruel luck on Carr, who had dominated the race and rarely looked in danger. But now his challenge was over, although thankfully neither he nor co-driver Peter Dredge were injured, protected by their F-16 fighter cockpits. Andreas Uggland, meanwhile, in Fiat Uno, was still doing battle with Capo Ferri in B&B Italia. And as he passed a stricken Richard Carr, he knew that he'd moved up into third position. For Richard Carr, there was little left to do but to wait for assistance, perhaps ponder on the wisdom of fitting the longer torque tubes, which undoubtedly contributed to his downfall. Uggland's decision to fit two-stage turbochargers to his diesel, though, seemed to be paying off. The boat is unquestionably quicker, and although he lacks the flat-out speed of Cats in the calm condition, he's beginning to outgun them in the rough. But for now, all that matters was he was in third position, and the 225 points he would get if he finished would keep him as championship leader. Just ahead, Capo Ferri still looked the most comfortable, even if he was the least spectacular. The All-American Skater Cat and Merkuzu power is impressive. In the second place here, he would almost certainly mean he would finish in Europe's top three. But first, he had to hold off the challenge of Uggland. The Norwegian was threatening, and as they headed towards the Oathari Rocks for the third time, it looked odds-on that Uggland would eventually move ahead. Capo Ferri appeared unperturbed, almost as if he knew that fate was about to deal out another cruel blow to his rival. But first, Uggland, under full power, moved ahead, leaving Capo Ferri to ease once again into the shelter of his wash. Surely now Uggland finally had the measure of his man. And it did seem as if Capo Ferri had accepted that although he was capable of matching Uggland in the flat, he was not prepared to try and live with him in the rough. So Uggland it was who held all the cars with 1.5 laps to go. In the 4-litre British Championship, there's a tremendous battle going on between American Charles Burnett in D84 and the European champion Jeff Purves in Hospitality Inn, number D6. First Burnett and then Purves would take the lead, and although Purves' championship hopes weren't seriously under threat, he likes nothing than a good scrap, and Burnett was giving him just that. As they powered side by side into the Needle's Mark, it was difficult to believe that Burnett is in his first season of offshore racing, as he continuously kept the champion on the ropes. And when the two meet head-to-head in the World Championships in similar condition in Guernsey in 2 weeks' time, it would take a brave man to bet against either. Meanwhile, back with the Class 1 leaders, Ugland had just got alongside Spelter when he had his share of the day's disasters. Smoke filled his cockpit from an electrical fault behind the dash, and like Carr, he was forced to retire. And as he opened the hatches to reach the fresh air, all he could now do was watch Spelter disappearing into the distance. There was no doubting it was Spelter's day so far, and there were now only 3 of the 11 starters left. But for them, even finishing wasn't going to be that easy. In the end, it was Spelter who withstood the test of the pool tides to win and take the 400 points. It put him joint second in the championship. For Carr, the only consolation was the boat didn't sink, although his championship hopes had taken a dive. We asked him how rough it had been.
It wasn't that rough. I mean, the reason we did what we did and stuffed the boat was simply because we've run these experimental extra long torque tubes which made the boat trip, and yeah, we got wet. And
you can bring Peter in as well.
Yeah, I mean, like,
you had an up-front view, didn't you, Peter?
Yeah, I saw it about a split second before he did.
Yeah, it was rather unfortunate. I mean, like, if we're running a new air system on the boat as well, where we're actually cooling the air before it goes into the engine, so it's picked up above the hood. That's ready for Dubai, because obviously the air temperatures there are very high and we've got to keep the induction air temperature down. And because we stuffed it and we took water in, the engines got wet, and that's why we couldn't continue. But I mean, as you saw, I mean, the boat was running very well. We had the pace over San Benedetto easily. If it hadn't been for those experimental torque tubes, you know, I'm sure we would have done better. But we led the race from the start, and we were happy. Yeah, as I said, it was experimental. It was it's unfortunate what's happened. It's quite an experience, and it shows that, you know, the F-16 canopy actually protected both of us, and, you know, we got out of the boat after probably about a 75, 80 mile an hour impact. We got a little wet, but other than that, it was all right.
Andreas Ugland had fared no better, and we asked him what had happened.
Well, we were running quite well. We were starting to pick up speed on the 3rd lap, and had just passed Marco Capoferri in 2nd place, and Damiano was we were about side by side with him. Then suddenly there was smoke coming from the dashboard, and a couple of the electrical connections started melting. I basically couldn't breathe. So there was no other way than to stop, and as we stopped, 2 of the engines fell out. I mean, obviously some kind of electrical problem.
So the engine didn't blow at all, because obviously it seemed to be sort of smoking a lot earlier on in the race.
I heard people said that, but we had some problems to begin with changing, you know, over from single turbo to double turbo.
Right.
That most probably was what did it.
The celebrations were an all-Italian affair, and they alone stood on the winner's rostrum. It certainly had been a very fine performance indeed. And we leave you with the images of pool and Class 1 powerboat racing and the results to the 2nd round of the European Championships.